some of the big policy questions, but actually the opportunity we have is that all of us are holding the toolkit as well, so we can actually fix some of those problems, which is kind of exciting. And one of the big problems in my younger years in the industry, I remember maybe 6, 7 years ago being told that CP7 was the cliff edge on which all of our conventional signaling would go off all at once, and therefore we needed to make sure we'd ramped up ETCS delivery by that point. I suppose, perhaps starting with James, have we, is that cliff edge real, and how many duct-taped signals have we still got around the network that ETCS hasn't replaced yet? I suppose the starting point, where are we at with the big picture on ETCS rollout? What's the big story at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. I think you are right. The original view was that CP7 would be a critical control period, and still is. Yeah. What has happened is that we have pushed some work into later control periods. Not ideal for various reasons, some of them economic, and some of them to do with how we develop our structure. But the one element of that is the cliff edge is still there. Yep. All we've done is basically, we're probably standing on tiptoe at the cliff edge.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Classic railway.
Yeah, because one of the reasons why we kept saying CP7 will be a cliff edge is obsolescence is catching up with us. Yeah. So we do make and mend, but there is a limit to what you can do with something that's old. And I'm saying not old just in terms of time, but in terms of technology, in terms of the people you need to actually look after it. Yeah. So it's not just, well,
the expiry of knowledge as much as of bits and pieces. Yep.
Yes. So there is it's a number of schemes that, if you ignore ECDP for an instance, because it's been running for a while, so everyone knows about East Coast Digital Rail, but there's a number of schemes that are that will start towards the back end of CP7, and those will build the momentum into CP8. So you look, when we go into CP8, we probably get more, because if you look, in the past we've tended to have isolated projects. Yeah. Now we almost have a major project in each major route that will be kicking off.
A rolling program, you might say.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So that gives us a bit of a picture of what's going on out. So, you know, East Coast, I should say, we have with us, before I get cracking too much, at the far end we have Darren Jones, who's joining us, who's head of ERTMS at DB Cargo. We have Ben Lane from Siemens, who's infrastructure lead and the the program director for East Coast Digital. And we have James Dzimba, who is Chief Control Command and Signaling Engineer at Network Rail. So we have Darren, we have Ben, and we have James joining us. So we have, you know, the thing that I was told when I was joining, and I was like, well, that sounds like it's going to be exciting, is actually still a reality. And we're maybe at one control period a little bit later, but it sounds like, other than East Coast, there are some of these major schemes starting to reach point of development. Ben, I wanted to go to you. You've got East Coast going on. We have learned a lot on East Coast. In terms of some of the big picture, maybe a couple of the small things, where are we at in terms of, you know, firstly, in terms of the technology maturity, where are we at from 5 years ago? Where are we at now with what you think has changed in the technology? Have fun covering that in 5 minutes. But also, what are some of those lessons that we have learned that are helping us to accelerate some of that delivery and roll that out to some of the non-East Coast programs as they develop?
Well, there's a lot to cover there, Gareth.
Let's worry about pick out some of the lessons learned that are rolling out of East Coast. Maybe it's not a bad place to start.
Yeah, let's give everyone a quick update on where we are then. So on the Northern City line, so Finsbury Park down to Moorgate, we took the signals out of there a few weeks ago. So GTR running that service, 1,200 trains a week, running an ETCS, 300 drivers. And what do we learn on that project? So many things. So things in the technology space, but more really how the signalling interacts with the drivers and the operators, and the Network Rail teams as well. So the real challenge for us on that, work with James's team, for example, was pulling a safety case together. So typically we have a signalling safety case. Does the signalling work? Is it safe? Now the signalling system's on the train, with the people like Darren's guys, we need to figure out how that comes together with the signalers and how that whole new ecosystem works. So what does that mean? That means we have to change so many existing standards, so many operational procedures.
Yeah.
It's all of those kind of things that you don't think about, or you do think about, but you can't think of everything.
You almost have to live it to start understanding. It's the unknown unknowns, right? Unlocking those.
And that's exactly it. And that's where we've taken the work that James's team have done with the reference design, for example, which is principally, a good piece of work. But until you actually go and implement that on the railway for real, you can't think of all the scenarios until you run all of the hazards and workshops with all of the users to think what could go wrong in this situation, what happens. And that's been a huge challenge, and we've had to change the design around that. We've had to do more R&D work than we thought we would, especially things like temporary speed restrictions, emergency speed restrictions, how we implement those. And on the East Coast Main Line, that's performance driven. So you need pretty granular speed restriction systems. But the exciting thing when you do that is you then start to unlock lots of other opportunities where you can use the technology.
Yeah.
So our business case said, this is how we're going to run a railway. These are the benefits. Now, as we get into that, we're actually unpicking more and more benefits.
That's some good news, unknown unknowns. It's not all bad news. You get some good things that you didn't realise would be.
And that's fantastic, because then all of a sudden, the routes say, oh, wow, so I could do this. So I could get track workers out like this. So I don't have to put boards and magnets out. I can take speed restrictions off in an instant. All of these kind of things you start to unlock as you go through those scenarios. So in that digital space, there's now more and more opportunities to improve the railway that we didn't realise 5 years ago. So there's challenges, but there's also opportunities, which is where we are.
So one of the things I was chatting with James and yourselves, actually, one of the interesting and to my mind quite fascinating things about digital signal, about ETCS and the RTMS is, in a way, it's pushing us back towards thinking about the railway as an integrated system in a way that the GBR is not quite there yet, and yet our technology is pushing us in that direction. That's basically reintegrating the operation of the railway into the naturally much better tying track, train operations, big picture timetabling questions, all that stuff is kind of being reintegrated. But there are challenges that come with that, which is, Darren, you have trains, you have drivers, and all of a sudden you're asking a lot more out of both of those resources, if you like. What does that look like from, whether it's planning what that, the change, the business change, or whether it's materially making sure drivers are, and maintainers of the trains are happy? What does that look like? How much work have you been putting in to get that new world of a much more integrated system to actually kind of manifest?
Yeah, so it's a good point. Drivers and maintainers are probably one of the most impacted roles that we have in our organisation, but there are others as well. Yeah. And what we need is a mature design that helps us then drive what training and competencies that we need to deliver to both the driver and the maintainers. So what we've been doing over the last few years is trying to get to that point, particularly on the Class 66, which is the principal freight locomotive in the UK, which has come with its own challenges because there are multiple variants of the Class 66 because they were brought in over a number of years, all slightly different design, and they were all built by hand as well, so not one locomotive is the same.
Yeah, that's it.
So some of the challenges we've had has certainly been around that design, and because the program's been going on for such a long time, a lot of those standards and things change that the design then has to change from, which causes slight rework. I think going back to Ben's point as well, we're also building the technical and the safety case alongside that design, which helps us then carry out our business change and transformation activities that we have to do internally. So we're trying to do everything at once because the program is moving to the right. Yep. Where when this was sort of first born out, when I joined the program in 2017, we had a first in class to focus on, do a little bit of business change, then a long period of time to get ready before fleet fitment. We're now doing first in class. We're about to start fleet fitment next month. Everything's all happening at once. So the planning and the replanning is certainly a challenge on this program.
Yeah. So while you take a drink of water, James, the thing, sorry, we were having a conversation about some of the other interesting things is contracting strategy. Is that what was potentially perceived as a fairly self-contained output-led, like we're going to, hello train operators, we're going to just change this and you'll survive. Maybe that sort of attitude at the start, it's evolved into a much more integrated approach. We've already talked about it, but from a contracting perspective and from how you actually build those relationships in the supply chain to deliver that work, what's that look like from a client side, if you like, a Network Rail side perspective, and what are some of the things that you've seen develop over the last not even 5 years, it's before even 2017, we're talking about 10 years now, at least, of a pretty well-developed program. What have you seen developing over that period from the relationship with the supply chain and delivering?
I think it's become very much more collaborative in terms of we decide what as an industry, what do we want to achieve and how do we go about achieving it. So if you find the way East Coast was contracted with Siemens, for instance, it's much more of a partnership rather than what would have done in the past, where we write a piece of paper to say, can you do this for us, and we'll pay you when it's done. Yeah. And then we start debating when things don't work out the way we expected. So that's evolved a lot in terms of the relationship, even the engagement we have with Ben and his colleagues as well, in terms of what are we trying to achieve in the first instance. Yep. Once we have a common understanding of what the output is, it's how do you achieve that goal. And that has allowed us to have a much more mature contracts approach in that sense. For instance, for the delivery mechanisms, we now have what's called the train control system framework, where we have got a number of contractors, contracts that are clear on our expectations and what we can support them in terms of development. For instance, there's a hook in there to say, well, if you've got something that you want to develop and it's not quite ready yet, let's talk about it and find a way of developing that. I think Ben was talking about technology evolution and even maturity. ETCS is a mature technology. However, the delivery mechanism, particularly in the UK, it still has to mature, and we have to build on that. And yes, we started off from a base of what we know, but that's evolved. If we are going to start ECDP now, today or tomorrow, we would not do it the same way we did it when we commenced. That's not because it was bad. It's just simply because we have learned a lot more and we'll be able to apply that knowledge. Yeah. And that will benefit future programs, because then what you want to be able to do is to be able to repeat.
Absolutely. We don't want to learn all of these lessons.
Yes.
Again,
so we
again.
want to move away from each project being unique in terms of the learning outcomes. We want to be able to say, actually, this project is very much the same as what we did in ECDP. What do we need to do different and why? Yep. There might be cases where there would be a reason to be different, but broadly speaking, it should be the same. Yep. It makes it easier for the train operating companies. It makes it easier for maintenance teams and our delivery organizations.
Yep. As an advocate for freight, one of the things I felt early on in the kind of the journey we were taking on digital rail was that freight was, let's put it lightly, a bit of an afterthought in the process. I don't think that's true anymore, and Darren, I'm sure you agree with that. But have you seen that change? What has that looked like? And what are some of the key things you think are better now than perhaps they were? And things, again, that we want to make sure we keep a hold of that learning process.
Yeah, I think that's probably a valid point. So one thing we did realise quite early on is when the benefits case was put together for ECDP, there was no real freight thought in there at all. And of course, freight doesn't just operate on one scheme. We travel between different routes. So for us, getting involved with that benefits to making sure that the ECDP becomes the blueprint, in effect, for all of these other schemes going live means eventually freight will have longer trains that we can operate, because if we don't get that right on the ECDP, it's not going to roll into those other schemes. Yep. So for me, being part of that benefits mapping, making sure that the freight benefits were captured, means that we've all got that common goal to work towards now on ECDP.
Nice. Right, so the E in both ERTMS and ETCS stands for European, and then Siemens is very much a European, well, it's a global company, but it has a strong core in mainland Europe. I'm curious to know generally what's the kind of learning journey look like across the channel a bit? Like, given that we don't have a particularly unique railway. Our railway is pretty much the same as all the railways in Europe, actually. Like, we get Victorian Railway, this, that, but actually the railway is the railway. But we have our own, let's say, structural differences, and I don't mean civil engineering. What has the learning journey looked like in terms of what Siemens have been able to bring, and your partners been able to bring in terms of knowledge from the continent to the UK, but also in the other direction, from an export perspective? What's that knowledge sharing look like?
Yeah, well, that's a lot to cover as well.
I've been giving you all the easy questions, but I don't know what you're about.
So from a European point of view, I mean, a lot of our technology is developed in the UK, down in Chippenham, but also we use components from Spain and from Germany. So we have all of those touch points on the continent. I think when I present what we're doing on East Coast to our European colleagues, the slide that always blows them away is the stakeholder map.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've got all of these freight operating companies, passenger companies, on-track machine operators, and how do you pull all of those things together? Now, on the continent, yes, of course, you've got different operators in different countries, but it's usually in a much more controlled framework, which has more influence. So the level of integration that we have to do in the UK to achieve that is multiple times harder than on the continent typically. And I think the other big difference of what we're doing in the UK, and this will drive some of the innovation that will feed back into Europe as well, from the UK certainly, is around the complexity of our railway and how it operates. So if you travel on lots of European ETCS railways, they're often kind of like what we've deployed in the UK. They're quite niche. They're quite the Cambrians. They're 0 to 12s. They're Northern City lines. They're high-speed, simple railways typically. Not everywhere. The ETCS is obviously spreading out. But the complexity of those railways is far simpler than what we're trying to do. And obviously we've gone big to start with on the East Coast main line. You can't get many more complicated railways than on the East Coast with so many operators. But the benefit of that is when we do overcome those hurdles, we've solved problems for the whole country and potentially parts of Europe. And the technology that we develop to do that also can then get fed back into Europe as well. So absolutely. Lots of things we do with digital tooling, how we prepare that data. We've had to do that because it's so complex.
Yeah, it feels like a massive opportunity actually. The UK, BR frankly, led the world on solid state interlocking way back, and we kind of lost, unfortunately, the timing of that. We lost touch on the grip of that. We feel like even though it's European it actually feels like we are right at the head of the charge in the state of the art in developing this technology, which gives us a massive export opportunity, right? And there does feel like a major opportunity there. As the last point I wanted to raise before we open up for questions, so everyone brew up your questions, is we've got the rolling program where it sounds like there is the emergence of a program. What are we doing to make sure we've embedded that learning? And I kind of, from all of your different perspectives. So, Darren, I'll start with you. What in making sure that as your organisation continues to have to manage this, what's happening in terms of ensuring that learning is continuing? Is it about making sure that you've got the training to go on so the knowledge continues? Your team specifically, the succession. I'm curious to make sure that the learning James was talking about is retained so that we keep the momentum going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to Ben's point about the amount of partners on this program, it also brings a benefit because we can learn from those that have gone first as well. So we've done a lot of work, BB Cargo particularly, with GTR, how they approach their transformation activities, how they've handled their test train activities and things like that, and we've learned the lessons from them. And everything we're trying to develop, like the engineering training, the driver training, across freight, it's broadly similar. Yeah. So that learning we've done as a collaborative approach between all the operators using the central resource. So, yeah, I think the lessons that we're learning we can pass on in multiple forms.
So collaboration actually and cross-industry partnerships is very much as you see its strength. Ben, a slightly different angle, which is what things do you need as a major supplier of this? What do you need to happen to make sure you can keep the learning going? Like, what are the things you need from government, from client side, to make sure you can lock in that knowledge going forwards? I suppose make sure the rolling funding for a rolling program is still there. It's probably number one on the list, right?
Yeah, it's easy just to say funding, but what does funding mean? It really means continuity. So the skills and the people that we've developed and that learning, we can't lose that. So. Where we are in the programme, Northern City Lines commissioned the Wellington Hitch and driver training area to train 3,000 drivers. That will go live next year. Yep. It's already in a pretty mature state. But then we've got a gap before we then deploy the next no signals railway. We need 3,000 drivers to get train ready before we can go right. And that's where you unlock all the benefits in terms of cost saving and efficiencies. And we're working on those schemes now. And working with Network Rail, especially Network Rail operations, the possibilities that we're unlocking going straight to a no signals railway are really, really exciting.
Yeah.
And what you can do at a lower cost point is really, really exciting to the route, certainly on the East Coast route. So that's where we're heading with it. Yeah, we just need that continuity to keep that momentum going, keep those projects rolling through, and we need to ensure as an industry that we also link up the other projects in the UK. So when we say what have we learnt, we are still doing a hell of a lot of learning.
Yeah, yeah.
So if people start to fracture and start to develop their own ways of working or thinking, that could cause divergence. So we need to make sure we're joined up as an industry and keep working together.
So for us as an industry, collaboration is key to make this work. Our ask to government and to the funders is that we need the continuity. That feels like a quite nice way to go into questions. Pleased to see quite a decent representation of the supply chain out in the audience. So chuck your arms up. Any questions, please? And there will be I was going to say there'll be a roving microphone. There's not a roving microphone. I'll run around with a microphone by the look of it. Stefan, give me a microphone. Let's make that happen. Thank you. Yeah, any questions? At the back, right. I'm multi-purpose. Oh, marvellous. Is it? There you are. I'll give you a microphone, Joe. Thank you. There you are.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Joseph Quashie, Northwest and Central Region Network Rail. My question was about you were talking about freight and the considerations that have been given to freight within, I assume, the requirements for the program that you were referring to. Can you elaborate a bit more on what should have been included in terms of considerations for freight at an early stage?
Yeah, so the ECDP was developed as a benefits-led program, and the blueprint that was originally designed, like I say, didn't really take much into account on what that means to freight. And when we talk about benefits, we're not just talking about all the good things that you might be able to get from it. It's actually understanding the disbenefits that brings to us as well. So when you're looking at driver handovers, because you've got train data entry now that you've got to put in, where we've currently got a limit of 2 minutes, that could extend to 7 minutes. So that means that our drivers and our routes and our paths can all be impacted by the introduction of this technology. So it's those type of events that we built into that blueprint.
Yeah, good question. I mean, lots of ETCS, the user interface stuff, the differences between, like the user interface that was developed for passenger drivers and then the freight. I've got lots of friends across the freight industry, and a few all came and said, yeah, this display of this particular type of information, it's all very well when you've got a train that you can break within but if I've got multiple thousand tons, that doesn't, things like this that like ensuring that world is fully understood. Again, naturally pushing us to think about the railway as one joined up thing, which is kind of a useful behavioural outcome of this whole programme. Yeah, shove your hands up, more questions. That was a really good question. Yes, East West Rail, let's see what they have to say.
Yeah, hi, it's Neil Dance from East West Rail. Developing the programmes of lots of different regions doing everything, as it gets wider, you start to integrate those a bit more, and where's the control in mind to make sure that all the decisions that are made in individual routes are the same and they actually roll through as a single entity, so we don't end up having to do lots of work to integrate ETCS systems when they start to connect together.
So that was overcoming the route versus centralisation challenge on spec. James, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that. Internally within Network Rail, we have got a team sitting under what's called GBRX, called Industry Partnership for Digital Rail. Their sole purpose is to coordinate all activities across our delivery, all the programs, including driver, train fitment, things that you would traditionally not associate with Network Rail. That team helps coordinate that in conjunction with our industry partners to make sure that everything that we're doing is aligned. We're talking about training 3,000 drivers. We don't want to be training them in one part of the country and then actually need the same resource for the other part of the country. Is how do we sequence that? And that team helps to do that. But they are not working in isolation. They are working constructively with all industry partners. So it's not a Network Rail decision. It's not a supplier-led decision. It's actually an output-led decision in terms of how we deploy our resources.
One of the good things about freight being much more involved now is that freight don't give a stuff about the route boundaries because, as you said, Darren, most of your stuff just cuts straight through that stuff. The talks, okay, they kind of map up, but no, freight doesn't care about that because you're busy moving huge amounts of stuff across those boundaries. So actually, again, a chance for those lessons to roll back to the rest of the program, actually, which is quite good. Yeah, really good question. I don't know if either of you had any further thoughts on the routes versus the challenge of devolution there on that perspective.
The only thing I'd say from a technology point of view is on East Coast, we have a lab in Chippenham where we have all of the different onboard suppliers, onboard equipment in that lab interfacing with the trackside. So we've already got that commonality in an OEM space that we're working through those integration issues, and that's actually in a really good place. So from an integrating the technology, that's working. I think it's now how do we integrate the deployment in terms of programs of work and ensure that consistency. So yeah, that as James touched on, there's forums for that. There's the way the contracts have been let. There's also forums around those to make sure they're all integrated. So yeah, we're working through that.
And if people are looking for innovation space on ETCS, I can heartily recommend a test track near Melton Mowbray it's ETCS fitted and very good for that sort of thing. I'll take my plug hat off. So any other questions? Sorry, I digress. Yes, at the very back.
Thank you very much. My question based on the safety aspect of the people on ground, because I'm from a maintenance department from Network Rail. ETCS is good. Taking possession, line blockage, when these are in position, how are we doing the awareness, the safety awareness for the guys on track that actually access the track to do the main maintenance around the tracks? So I just want to know, from the management, if that's in place for us, please.
Yeah, so staff safety. And James, I don't know, do you want to pick that up?
No, staff safety is actually key to how we develop the schemes themselves. So there will be Darren was talking about benefits. That's one of the benefits that comes out from the deployment of ETCS, where you've got, where your trains are, for instance, at a particular instant. That means you can plan your work much more accurately. And I know Siemens and other suppliers are not even waiting for the deployment of ETCS to enhance staff safety by using some of the learning that we've got. So we already have systems that are on trial in various locations that the principles are based on ETCS, but they are applicable to the railway as it is now to allow us to actually enhance staff safety. So in answer to your question, it can only get better because at some point, I know there are technologies that are being developed to try and more accurately identify the location of not just the individual, but also what else might be it the infrastructure or equipment in that area that might cause harm to that individual. And that's happening now. That's not waiting for the rollout of ETCS.
It's kind of a double whammy because you've got the fact that you can be much more accurate about where staff are versus where trains are, but also you're taking away a lot of assets that require you to be trackside in the first place. So there's like a double barrel benefit to safety, and it's really important, as you said, that's absolutely rooted and embedded into it. Yeah, really good question. Thanks for that. Any other questions out there? Before I do a bit of a wrap up, I'm having the throat slit, which means it's time. Actually, you know what? Given this Rail Safety Week, I think actually maybe that's not a bad place to kind of wrap things up. If unless you any chaps had anything else you wanted to
I just want to build on that last point, really, that our business case is built on safety. Yeah. That's a fundamental of our business case. And historically in the signalling world, you've got to put the signals right next to the track. It's all driven by signal sighting. We don't have that anymore. So all the equipment we can move, a significant distance from the track, make it far more maintainable, far safer, layer that with how we access the track, and we've got constant supervision of the train, and it's a huge safety benefit. Huge safety benefit.
It's like a step change. It's a different world. It's fantastic. Yeah, everyone. Firstly, please say thank you to our fantastic panel. Thank you so much. Really, really good. I'm going to be locked into into the theatre all day, getting increasingly sweaty. But no, enjoy Rail Live, and please do come back. We've got a relentless number of really fascinating sessions. But thank you all for joining, and have a good rest of Rail Live. Cheers, folks. That was superb.